Burt Reynolds stood in the middle of the soundstage, arms crossed, that famous mustache twitching with barely concealed irritation. 20 feet away, behind the camera, sat Claire Dennison, the director whose career would be over in 6 weeks. 6 weeks. That's all it took. Not 6 months. Not a year. 6 weeks on one film set, and a promising young director would disappear from Hollywood forever. She'd just asked him to do the scene again. 3rd take, a simple request, standard procedure in filmmaking. But Burt Reynolds didn't do 3rd takes. Not for directors who looked like they should be serving coffee, not fetching it. "Claire," Burt said, his voice loud enough for the entire crew to hear. "I've been doing this since you were in diapers. The take was fine. Let's move on." The soundstage went silent. 40 crew members suddenly found reasons to stare at their shoes. But here's what makes this unforgettable. What happened in the next 60 seconds would set a pattern that would repeat every single day for 6 weeks. And by the end, Claire Dennison's name would be erased from Hollywood's memory. If you want to see how ego destroys careers in 6 weeks, stay with me. Drop a comment telling me where you're watching from right now. Claire Dennison looked at her script, then back at Burt. Her voice was calm, professional. "Burt, the lighting wasn't quite right. I just need—" "The lighting was perfect," Burt interrupted, walking toward her. "You know what your problem is? You're overthinking. This isn't film school anymore. This is a real movie with real money and a real schedule. We don't have time for your artistic vision." What happened next didn't make headlines. There were no cameras rolling, no reporters present, no dramatic walkout. Just 40 witnesses who watched Burt Reynolds systematically dismantle a young director's authority, scene by scene, day by day. But here's what nobody understood until years later. Claire Dennison wasn't just any director. She was the most promising young filmmaker in Hollywood. Studios were fighting over her. Legends wanted to work with her. After 6 weeks with Burt Reynolds, she never directed another feature film. This is the story of how ego doesn't just destroy careers, it erases them completely. And the man who did the erasing, he never even knew her name. 1974. Burt Reynolds was untouchable. Deliverance had made him a serious actor. The Longest Yard was about to make him the biggest star in America. He was handsome, charming, dangerous. Women wanted him. Men wanted to be him. Hollywood belonged to Burt Reynolds. Claire Dennison was 29 years old and had just been handed the directing job of her life. The film was called Desert Fire, a neo-Western thriller with a $15 million budget. Big stars, big studio, big career moment. She was one of only 3 women directing major studio films that year. The other 2 were veterans with decades of experience. Claire was the future. Everyone said so. But then the studio made one decision that would change everything. They chose Burt Reynolds as her lead actor. The studio had wanted a safe choice for director. Someone experienced, someone who wouldn't rock the boat. But the producer, a maverick named Richard Lansing, had fought for Claire. He'd seen her short films, her vision, her meticulous preparation. He believed in her. "She's going to be the next great American director," Richard told the studio executives. "Give her this chance." They agreed, with one condition. The lead actor had to be a proven star. Someone who could carry the film if the director stumbled. Someone bankable. They chose Burt Reynolds. Richard called Claire with the news. "You're directing Desert Fire. Burt Reynolds is your lead." Claire was thrilled. Burt Reynolds was a movie star, yes, but he was also a real actor. Deliverance proved that. She'd studied that performance, the vulnerability beneath the machismo. She wanted to pull that out of him again. But here's what Claire didn't know. She didn't know that Burt Reynolds hadn't let a director control him since John Borman on Deliverance, and he wasn't about to start with a 29-year-old woman. She prepared for weeks, shot lists, character notes, visual references. She made a book for Burt, explaining her vision for his character, Jake Mercer, a drifter running from his past. She wanted layers. She wanted pain beneath the swagger. Their first meeting was at the studio, 2 weeks before filming began. Claire walked into the conference room with her book, her notes, her excitement. Burt was already there, leaning back in his chair, cowboy boots on the table. He looked at Claire and smiled that famous smile. "You must be the director," Burt said, not standing up. "Claire Dennison," she said, extending her hand. "It's an honor to work with you, Burt. I'm a huge admirer of your work in—" "How old are you?" Burt interrupted. Claire blinked. "I'm 29. Burt laughed. 29. Jesus, I've got boots older than you." What he said next would set the tone for everything that followed. He looked at Richard Lansing. "This is who you got me? A film school kid?" Richard stepped in quickly. "Claire's incredibly talented, Burt. Her short film won—" "I don't care what it won," Burt said, still looking at Claire. "No offense, sweetheart, but I've been in this business for 20 years. I know what works. I know what audiences want. So here's how we're going to do this. You tell me where to stand, I'll do my thing, and we'll have ourselves a movie. Sound good?" Claire kept her smile professional. "I appreciate your experience, Burt. But I do have a specific vision for—" "Vision," Burt repeated, tasting the word. "Everyone in this town has a vision. You know what I have? Box office numbers. The Longest Yard is going to make $100 million. You know why? Because I don't overthink it. I trust my instincts." He finally stood up, towering over Claire. "You want my advice? Point the camera, say action, and get out of my way. That's how we make a hit." But then, something happened in that meeting that Claire should have recognized as a warning. But she didn't. She thought she could handle him. She thought wrong. Filming began on a ranch outside of Tucson, Arizona. Day 1, Scene 1. A simple scene. Jake Mercer arrives in a small desert town, dusty and exhausted. It was supposed to establish the character's weariness, his desperation. Claire explained the scene to Burt. "Jake's been riding for days. He's running from something. I want to see that weight in your eyes, in the way you move. Less swagger, more survival." Burt listened, nodding. Then he said, "Got it. Tired guy. I can do tired." "Action," Claire called. Burt walked into frame like he was strolling into a cocktail party. Confident, loose, that trademark Burt Reynolds smirk plastered across his face. "Cut," Claire said. "Burt, can we try it with less confidence? Remember, Jake is—" "Running from his past, I heard you," Burt said. "But here's the thing, Claire. Audiences don't want to see Burt Reynolds looking weak. They want to see me looking cool. That's what they pay for. This isn't about looking weak. It's about showing vulnerability." Burt laughed. "Vulnerability doesn't sell tickets. Sweetheart, trust me on this." The crew watched in silence. This was day 1, scene 1, and this was only the beginning. Claire took a breath. "Let's try one more, just for coverage." "Sure," Burt said. "But I'm telling you, the first take was better." They did 4 more takes. In every single one, Burt played it exactly the same way. Confident, cocky, untouchable. Everything Claire didn't want. On the 5th take, Claire walked over to Burt. "Can I show you what I mean?" Burt's smile tightened. "You want to show me how to act?" "I want to show you what I'm seeing in my head. Maybe if I—" "Claire." Burt's voice dropped low. "I've worked with the best directors in Hollywood. John Borman, Robert Aldrich, real filmmakers. Not once did any of them try to show me how to act. You know why? Because they trusted me to do my job." He looked around at the crew. "Now, if you want to keep wasting film and daylight, we can do this all day. or you can accept that I know what I'm doing and we can move on." Claire felt 40 pairs of eyes on her. This was the moment. She could push back, assert her authority, or she could let it go, keep the peace, maintain the schedule. She let it go. "Print take 2, Claire said quietly. Burt grinned. "See? We're learning to work together already." But they weren't working together. Not really. And what followed over the next 6 weeks was something Claire would never forget. Even 30 years later, she could still feel it. If this story is hitting different, hit that subscribe button. Because what happens next gets worse. Much worse. What followed over the next 6 weeks was a master class in how to undermine a director without ever openly defying them. Burt showed up late. Not egregiously late, just 15, 20 minutes. Enough to throw off the morning schedule. Burt rewrote his dialogue. Not huge changes, just a word here, a phrase there. Enough to make Claire's carefully crafted script sound like every other Burt Reynolds movie. Burt ignored Claire's blocking. She'd stage a scene one way, and Burt would casually stand somewhere else, forcing the camera to adjust to him. But here's what nobody expected. The thing that destroyed Claire wasn't the big confrontations. It was something much quieter, much more insidious. Burt talked to the crew. Not maliciously, not obviously. Just friendly conversations between takes. "You know, when I worked with Aldrich, we didn't do it this way." Or, "Borman would have shot this in one take, but hey, everyone has their process." Small comments, casual observations, but the effect was cumulative. The crew started looking to Burt for approval, not Claire. When Claire gave a direction, people would glance at Burt to see his reaction. If Burt nodded, they'd do it. If Burt looked skeptical, they'd hesitate. Claire was losing control of her own film, and there was nothing she could do about it. Richard Lansing visited the set in week 3. He pulled Claire aside. "How's it going with Burt?" Claire wanted to tell him the truth. She wanted to say that Burt Reynolds was systematically destroying her authority, making her look incompetent in front of her own crew. But if she complained about the star, she'd look like she couldn't handle the job. "It's fine," Claire said. "We're finding our rhythm." Richard nodded. "Good. The dailies look great. You're doing an excellent job." But the dailies didn't look great. They looked like every other Burt Reynolds movie. The specificity was gone, the nuance erased. Jake Mercer wasn't a broken man running from his demons. He was just Burt Reynolds in a cowboy hat. But then came week 5. And what happened in week 5 would break Claire completely. The scene was the emotional climax of the film. Jake confronts the man who destroyed his life, and for the first time, his armor cracks. He breaks down. It was the moment that justified everything before it. Claire had prepared for this scene for months. She'd written 10 pages of character notes. She knew exactly how it should play. They rehearsed in the morning. Burt read through the scene flatly, barely trying. Claire pulled him aside. "This is the most important scene in the movie, Burt. Jake finally lets his guard down. I need you to—" "I know what you need," Burt said. "You need me to cry. You need me to do some big emotional breakdown so you can prove you're a real director." "That's not—" "Let me tell you something, Claire. I've been the #1 box office star for 3 years. You know how I did that? By understanding what audiences want. They don't want to see me cry. They want to see me strong, in control. That's the character. But the script is words on paper. I'm the one bringing it to life. Me, not you." Claire felt something snap inside her. 6 weeks of being undermined, dismissed, patronized. 6 weeks of watching her vision disappear. "This is my movie." "Burt." Burt smiled. "No, sweetheart. This is my movie. You're just the person pointing the camera." And here's what makes this moment devastating. What Burt said next is something Claire would hear in her head for the rest of her life. They shot the scene. Burt played it cool, controlled, emotionless. No vulnerability, no breakdown. Just Burt Reynolds doing what Burt Reynolds always did. When Claire called cut, she looked at the script in her hands and realized she'd lost. The movie she'd wanted to make was gone. In its place was something generic, something safe, something that belonged entirely to Burt Reynolds. After that day, Claire stopped fighting. She pointed the camera, said action, and got out of Burt's way, just like he'd told her to in their first meeting. They finished filming 2 days ahead of schedule. At the wrap party, Burt gave a speech. "I want to thank our director, Claire Dennison, for her hard work and dedication. She's got a bright future ahead of her." Everyone applauded. Claire smiled and nodded, saying nothing. But here's what nobody knew that night. Claire's future had already been decided, and it didn't include directing. Desert Fire was released in January of 1975. It made $70 million, a solid hit. Critics called it a serviceable Burt Reynolds vehicle, and exactly what you'd expect. Nobody mentioned the director. Claire Dennison's name appeared in the credits, 1 second on screen, then gone. She never directed another feature film. She tried. She took meetings, pitched projects, sent out her reel. But something had changed. Word traveled in Hollywood, even when nobody spoke it out loud. Directors who'd worked with Burt called other directors. "How was he?" they'd ask, and the answer was always careful, coded. "He knows what he wants. He's very involved in the process. He has strong opinions." Translation: Burt Reynolds will take over your movie. But it was more specific than that. The word that followed Claire was different. Couldn't handle Burt. Too inexperienced. Lost control of her set. One producer told her directly, "You're talented, Claire, but studios want directors who can manage big personalities. After Desert Fire, they're not sure you can." "What happened on Desert Fire?" Claire asked. The producer shrugged. "I heard Burt was difficult. I heard you struggled." Claire wanted to scream. She wanted to tell him that she hadn't struggled. She'd been sabotaged. But what could she say? Burt Reynolds undermined me daily? He ignored my directions and turned the crew against me? She'd sound bitter, weak, exactly what they already thought. So she said nothing. By 1978, Claire Dennison had left Hollywood. She moved to San Francisco, taught film classes at a community college, made short documentaries about local artists. Good work, important work, but not the career she'd been promised. Burt Reynolds went on to make Smokey and the Bandit, The Cannonball Run, Best Friends. He became the biggest movie star in the world. In interviews, he was charming, self-deprecating, beloved. Nobody ever asked him about Claire Dennison. Why would they? Her name had already been erased. But here's what Burt Reynolds never knew. And this is the part that changes everything. Claire wasn't the only one. Over the next decade, 3 other young directors worked with Burt. 2 women, 1 man. All of them fresh, talented, full of vision. All of them experienced the same pattern. Burt showing up late, rewriting dialogue, ignoring blocking, winning over the crew. One of them, a director named Michael Paris, quit mid-production. He walked off the set during week 4, telling the producer, "I'm not a director on this film. I'm a babysitter for Burt's ego. Find someone else." The studio had to shut down production for a week. It cost them millions. Michael Paris never directed another major studio film. By the early 80s, something strange started happening in Hollywood. Burt Reynolds was still a huge star, but the quality of directors willing to work with him started to decline. The visionaries, the artists, the ones with real creative control, they all politely passed when Burt's name came up. Creative differences, they'd say, or scheduling conflicts, or not the right fit. Translation, we've heard the stories. Burt never understood why. He'd sit in meetings with studio executives, talking about his next project, and they'd suggest directors he'd never heard of. Journeymen, TV veterans, people who'd make the movie exactly how Burt wanted. What about Scorsese? Burt would ask. What about Coppola? The executives would smile and change the subject. Burt Reynolds remained a star until the mid-'80s, but the quality of his films declined. The scripts got worse, the directors got weaker, the stories got thinner. He was still Burt Reynolds, still charming, still bankable, but the work stopped mattering. In 1989, Burt's career collapsed. A string of flops, an expensive divorce, bad investments. By the 90s, he was doing TV movies and self-parody roles. When journalists asked what happened, Burt always had the same answer. Hollywood changed. They stopped making the kind of movies I was good at. But Hollywood hadn't changed. Burt had simply run out of directors willing to let him take over their films. And here's the final twist, the thing that makes this story unforgettable. Claire Dennison never spoke publicly about Desert Fire. Not in interviews, not in her classes, not even to friends. But in 2003, a film student writing a thesis about women directors in the 70s tracked Claire down in San Francisco. "What happened after Desert Fire?" the student asked. "You were supposed to be the next big thing." Claire was 58 years old by then, still teaching, still making documentaries, still loving film, but the bitterness had faded into something else. Not forgiveness, but clarity. "I was young," Claire said. "I thought talent was enough. I thought if I made good work, people would respect me. But I was a woman in a man's industry, and I was directing a man who believed his instincts were more valuable than my vision. Every day on that set was a battle I couldn't win." "Did you ever talk to Burt about it?" Claire smiled sadly. "Burt didn't think he was doing anything wrong. That's what made it so devastating. He genuinely believed he was helping me, teaching me how movies really worked. He had no idea he was destroying me. Do you think things would be different now?" Claire thought about that for a long moment. Maybe if Desert Fire happened today, I'd have more support, more protection. Or maybe I'd still lose, just in a different way. The industry protects its stars, not its artists. Burt Reynolds died in 2018. The obituaries called him a legend, an icon, the epitome of cool. They listed his greatest films, his box office records, his cultural impact. Nobody mentioned Claire Dennison. She read about his death in the San Francisco Chronicle. She felt nothing. Not anger, not satisfaction. Just the quiet exhaustion of someone who'd carried a weight for 40 years and was finally allowed to set it down. If this story moved you, share it with someone who needs to hear it. Subscribe for more untold Hollywood stories. A month after Burt died, Claire received an email from Richard Lansing, the producer who'd fought to get her the Desert Fire job. They hadn't spoken in decades. "Claire, I don't know if you'll read this, but I need to say it. I failed you on Desert Fire. I knew what Burt was doing, and I didn't stop it. I told myself it was just creative friction, that you'd find a way through. But the truth is, I was afraid of Burt, afraid he'd walk, afraid the movie would collapse. So I protected him instead of you. I'm sorry." Claire read the email twice. Then she closed her laptop and went back to editing her latest documentary. Some apologies come too late to matter. The tragedy of Claire Dennison isn't just that her career was destroyed. It's that nobody remembers it was destroyed. There's no record of what happened on that set, No evidence of Burt's daily sabotage. Just a talented director who made one film and disappeared. Hollywood is full of stories like this. Young filmmakers who had one chance, one shot, and lost it to someone bigger, someone more powerful, someone who couldn't stand the idea of not being in control. Burt Reynolds never thought he was a villain. He thought he was a pro, a veteran showing rookies how the business worked. He thought he was helping. But here's the thing about ego. It doesn't need to be malicious to be destructive. Claire Dennison deserved a career. She deserved the chance to make the films she'd envisioned, to grow into the director everyone said she'd become. Instead, she got 6 weeks with Burt Reynolds, and that was enough to erase her completely. The last time anyone asked Burt about Desert Fire was in 2012, in an interview for a retrospective documentary. "Do you remember the director?" the interviewer asked. Burt thought for a moment. "No, actually, I don't." The interviewer checked his notes. "Claire Dennison." "Oh, right, Claire. Sweet girl. Yeah, she did a fine job." "She never directed another feature." Burt shrugged. "This business is tough. Not everyone makes it." He said it without cruelty, without awareness, just a simple statement of fact. Claire Dennison watched that documentary alone in her apartment. When Burt said he didn't remember her name, she laughed. Not a bitter laugh, something closer to relief, because that's exactly what she'd always suspected. She'd lost everything, and Burt Reynolds had never even learned her name. That's the real cost of ego. Not just what it destroys, but how easily it forgets.